That old train screamed as it clawed its way up the mountain. Inside, two sisters watched their Oregon home disappear forever. Josephine Reeves pressed her face to that grimy window, ropes cutting into her wrists. Her younger sister Jane was shaking beside her. "We'll find a way out of this," Josephine whispered. "I promise." But Jane's voice cracked. "How, Josie? Nobody knows where they took us." Their father had just died, leaving them a fortune worth killing for. A man claiming to be their uncle showed up with papers and armed men. When the sisters refused to go, they were taken by force. What they didn't know? 3 miles ahead, a cowboy named Clayton Zachary sat alone on a ridge, watching those tracks. His rifle glinted in the fading sun. He checked his daddy's old pocket watch. "Right on time," he said. Clayton wasn't a train robber. He was just a man paying back an old debt. And he was about to do something no one had ever done before. Stop that train with nothing but logs, rocks, and 6 bullets. But here's what Clayton didn't know. The men hunting these sisters weren't just hired guns. Someone close to their family wanted them dead. And the betrayal ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The lesson. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected. And real courage means keeping your promises even when the cost is everything. If this story grabbed you from the first line, drop a comment sharing what promise you've kept no matter the cost. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that keeps you breathless until the very end. And if someone in your life needs to hear that help can come from the most unexpected places, share this with them right now. That old train screamed as it clawed its way up the mountain. Inside, Josephine and Jane Reeves watched their Oregon home disappear. It was 1878, and ropes were tied tight around their wrists. Their spirits felt just as bound. Josephine, the oldest at 22, leaned against the dirty window. "We will find a way out of this, Jane, I promise," she whispered. She did not want their captor, a man named Hoffman, to hear. Jane, just 19, held back a sob and nodded. "But how, Josie? We are so far from home and nobody knows where they took us." The sisters had no idea that a cowboy named Clayton Zachary was waiting for them up ahead. 3 miles down the track, Clayton sat on his horse, Storm, watching from a ridge. The setting sun shined on the rifle across his back. He pulled out his father's old pocket watch. "Right on time," he mumbled to his horse. A friend, Sheriff Harper, had told him when the train would pass. Clayton was not a train robber. At 27, he was a ranch hand. But a telegram from the sheriff had sent him on this path. It was short and to the point. The Reeves sisters were taken. They were on the northbound train. The message asked him to stop it and promised a reward. Clayton knew of the Reeves family. Their father, Thomas Reeves, was a good man who had died 6 months ago. Clayton heard gossip about relatives fighting over the family fortune, but he never paid it much mind. Now that gossip seemed mighty important. He led his horse down to a tight curve in the tracks. He had already piled logs and rocks there. It was just enough to make the train stop without causing a wreck. As the train whistle blew, Clayton hid behind some big rocks with his rifle ready. He hoped he would not have to shoot anyone, but a little firepower always made folks listen better. Inside the car, Josephine heard the whistle and then the loud grinding of the brakes. "We are slowing down," she whispered to Jane. "This is not a station." Mr. Hoffman jumped to his feet, his hand on his gun. "Stay in your seats," he ordered the sisters. He then walked toward the front of the car. The train screeched to a halt. Josephine saw the conductor get off to check the tracks. Her heart started to pound. This could be their chance. "Jane," she said with urgency, "if there is any distraction, we run. Do you hear me? We run, and we do not look back." Outside, Clayton walked toward the front of the stopped train. His rifle was in plain sight. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said to the crew. "Looks like you have some trouble here." The conductor, a skinny man with a gray mustache, glared at him. "Did you do this? This is a federal crime, mister." "I'm afraid so," Clayton said calmly. "I'm looking for 2 passengers, the Reeves sisters." I believe they are on this train against their will. A large guard stepped up, his hand near his pistol. This train is on a schedule. We do not have time for... The crack of Clayton's rifle stopped him short. A bullet kicked up dust right between the guard's boots. The next one will not miss, Clayton said in a low voice. Now, I am not here to hurt anyone or to rob this train. I just want the Reeves girls. The gunshot caused panic inside the third car. Mr. Hoffman cursed and peered out the window. That was the moment Josephine was waiting for. Now, she hissed to Jane. She stood up and slammed her shoulder into Hoffman's back. He stumbled, and Jane quickly followed her sister's lead. Together they ran for the back door of the train car. "Stop them!" Hoffman yelled, getting his balance and pulling his pistol. Clayton heard the yelling just as the rear door flew open. Two young women with their hands tied ran out. He knew it was them. "Josephine! Jane!" he called out. Josephine stopped for a second when she heard her name. She saw Clayton and her eyes grew wide. "Mr. Zachary." Before Clayton could say another word, Hoffman appeared in the doorway with his pistol raised. Clayton fired his rifle without a second thought. The bullet hit the man's arm, making him drop the gun and cry out in pain. "This way!" Clayton yelled to the sisters. He backed up toward his horse, keeping his rifle aimed at the train crew. "Hurry now!" Josephine grabbed Jane's arm and they ran toward the cowboy. It was hard to run with their hands tied, but hope pushed them forward. More men, friends of Hoffman, started yelling from the train. Clayton reached his horse Storm and untied a second horse he had brought for them. "Both of you get on," he said, helping Jane and then Josephine onto the mare. He quickly cut the ropes on their wrists with his knife. Gunshots came from the train. Bullets flew past them as Clayton got on Storm. "Hold on tight and follow me," he told Josephine. "Stay low." He spurred his horse and galloped away from the tracks into the thick woods. Josephine gripped the reins and urged her horse to follow. Jane held on tight to her sister's waist. The men on the train fired a few more times, but soon they were too far away. After riding for almost an hour, Clayton finally stopped them by a little stream. While the horses drank, he turned to the sisters. His face was full of concern. "Are you two hurt?" he asked. His voice was much softer now. Josephine shook her head as she helped Jane get off the horse. "No, just scared. How did you know where to find us? Why did you come for us?" Clayton took off his hat. "Sheriff Harper sent a message. He said you were taken by men who claimed to be family." He looked at them closely. "Is that true?" Jane sat down on a log, her whole body shaking. "Mr. Hoffman came to our home after our father's will was read. He said he was our uncle from Chicago and our new guardian. When we argued, his men forced us onto the train." Josephine nodded. "He had papers, but it all felt wrong. He would not let us talk to anyone." Her green eyes looked angry. "He is not our uncle. Our father did not have any brothers." Clayton frowned. "The sheriff thought so. Your father's estate is quite valuable, is it not?" "The lumber mill and shipping business are worth a fortune," Josephine said. "And that is not counting the land. Father built it all from nothing." "And now you are the heirs," Clayton finished. "That makes you a target for men like Hoffman." The truth of it all settled between them as evening fell. Clayton started to gather wood for a fire. "We cannot go straight back to Oregon City," he finally said. "Hoffman's men will be looking for you there. We need a safe place to hide while Sheriff Harper looks into this." Josephine cleaned the dirt from Jane's face with stream water. "Where will we go?" Clayton began building the fire. "I have a friend with a ranch about a 2-day ride from here. His name is Matthew Collins. His place is hard to find and easy to defend. We will be safe there." As night came, the fire crackled between them. Jane was already asleep, wrapped in a blanket. Josephine just stared into the flames. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know what would have happened to us." Clayton nodded, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Get some rest, Miss Reeves. Tomorrow is another day." "Some men think they can just take whatever they want. But every now and then a quiet man stands in their way. This is a story about paying back debts and standing up for what is right, even when it is hard. By the flickering light of the campfire, Josephine watched Clayton Zachary. He was a man of few words who had risked his own life for her and her sister. When the sun came up, he was already awake, watching their back trail. He handed them some dried beef. "We have to move," he said. "Hoffman's men will be looking for us by now." Josephine worried for her sister Jane, who looked pale and was sore from all the riding. "Is there a town nearby where we can rest?" she asked. Clayton just shook his head. "Too dangerous. But we will take it slower today." He looked at Jane with real concern. "Can you manage, Miss Reeves?" Jane straightened up tall. "I will be fine, Mr. Zachary. I will not be the one to slow us down." Within the hour, they were riding again. Clayton led them through creek beds and rough country to hide their tracks. To keep her sister's mind off the journey, Josephine started asking Clayton questions. "How is it you know the sheriff?" she asked, as their horses stepped carefully across a stream. A small smile touched Clayton's lips. "We rode together in the war. I was just a boy who had lied about my age to join. Harper looked out for me, taught me how to track and shoot." His eyes seemed to look at something far away. "We went our separate ways after that, but he knows he can count on me when things get tight." As the morning went on, Jane found her voice. "And what brought you to Oregon?" A shadow crossed Clayton's face. "I was working cattle in Wyoming up until about a year ago. I ran into some trouble. I needed a fresh start." The way he said it made it clear that was all he was going to say. Josephine understood that out here, plenty of folks had a past they wanted to leave behind. Around noon, they stopped at a spring for water. Clayton spread a worn map on a rock. "We are right here," he said, pointing to a spot about 30 miles from the railroad tracks. "The Collins Ranch is another day-and-a-half ride from this spot." Josephine traced the route with her finger. "And what happens when we get to safety?" Clayton folded the map. "The sheriff will be investigating Hoffman. Once we know who we are dealing with, we can make a plan to get you home safe and reclaim what is yours." Josephine looked him square in the eyes. "And what about you? Why are you risking so much for us?" Clayton was quiet for a second. "Your father was a good man. He gave me work when I desperately needed it. I always pay my debts." Josephine had a feeling there was more to it, but before she could ask, Clayton suddenly went stiff. His hand dropped to his rifle. "Get down now," he ordered in a low voice, pointing to a thicket of brush. "Someone is coming." The sisters scrambled into the brush while Clayton hid the horses. He found a good spot with his rifle and scanned the trail. Sure enough, 5 riders appeared. Even from a distance, Josephine could tell the large man in the lead was Hoffman. They were following the creek bed, searching for any sign of tracks. Clayton slipped back to where the sisters were hiding. "It is Hoffman and 4 others," he whispered. "They are on our trail, but they have not found it yet." Jane gripped her sister's hand, her face white with fear. "What are we going to do?" Clayton's expression was grim. "We wait. If they pass us, we will head east into the high country. It is a harder way to go, but it will throw them off. If they find us—" He patted his rifle. "We fight." For what felt like hours, they stayed completely still. They watched as Hoffman's men searched the whole area. At one point, a tracker got off his horse and checked the ground right by the spring, dangerously close to where they had been. Josephine held her breath, hearing every tiny sound around her. Finally, after a short argument they could not hear, Hoffman's group got back on their horses and continued north, following the creek away from them. Clayton waited until they were long gone. "They made a mistake," he said, and you could hear the relief in his voice. "They think we are heading straight for Oregon City. This buys us some time." They mounted their horses quickly and headed east into even rougher country. The afternoon sun was brutal. By sunset, Jane was swaying in her saddle from exhaustion. Clayton found them a good spot to camp in a rock alcove, where a small fire would stay hidden. He built a tiny fire that made almost no smoke. Jane ate a little jerky and was asleep almost immediately. Josephine sat wrapped in a blanket, watching Clayton clean his rifle like he had done it 1,000 times before. "You have been in this situation before," she said quietly. "Running and hiding." Clayton did not look up. "Life out here teaches you to always be prepared." She decided to ask him directly. "What happened back in Wyoming?" "I'm trusting you with our lives, Mr. Zachary. I think I have a right to know who is protecting us." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his face half in shadow from the fire. "I was the foreman on the Blackwater Ranch," he said. "The owner's daughter, Elizabeth, and I became close. Her father did not approve. When he found out, he accused me of stealing cattle and money." His jaw tightened. It was not true, but that did not matter. On a man's own land, his word is the law. "What did you do?" Josephine asked softly. "I left. Elizabeth wanted to come with me, but I was not going to ruin her life like that. So I rode out alone, just one step ahead of her father's men." He poked the fire with a stick. "I have been moving ever since. I thought Oregon was far enough away that I could start over." Josephine finally understood him. He was helping them because he knew what it was like to be wronged by a powerful man. "You are a good man, Clayton Zachary." He looked up, surprised that she used his first name. For the first time, a real smile crossed his face, which softened his hard features. "Get some rest, Josephine. Tomorrow is going to be another long day." As she settled down next to her sleeping sister, she watched Clayton against the night sky. She felt a connection growing between them, something that was more than just being thankful for a rescue. That thought warmed her more than the fire, and she finally drifted off to sleep. The next day was clear and hot as they rode through the rocky country. Jane seemed to feel much stronger after a good night's rest, and Clayton kept them moving at a steady pace. By the middle of the afternoon, they came over a rise and could see a wide valley below them. In the distance, they saw a cluster of buildings. "There it is," Clayton said, pointing. "The Collins Ranch. About 3 more hours to go." Josephine shaded her eyes and looked at the big ranch with its main house, barn, and corrals. "It looks so peaceful," Jane said with a sigh. "Matthew runs a good operation," Clayton said. "He also keeps to himself and does not ask a man about his past. His wife, Sarah, is a good woman. She will make you all comfortable." As they made their final approach to the ranch, 2 riders came out from a stand of trees to meet them. Men with rifles emerged from the trees, but Clayton just raised a calm hand. "It is Clayton Zachary," he called out. "I have come to see Matthew." The ranch hands eased up some, but kept a watchful eye as they led the 3 riders to the main house. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped onto the porch, his sharp eyes sizing up everything at once. "Clayton," he greeted with a Texas drawl. "Did not figure on you bringing company." Clayton swung down from his horse. "Matthew, forgive me for dropping in. These ladies need a safe place to land for a while. This is Josephine and Jane Reeves." Matthew gave Clayton's hand a firm shake, then tipped his head to the sisters. "Any friend of Clayton's is a friend of ours. Y'all come on in. My wife will see you are comfortable." His wife, Sarah, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s, took one look at the sisters and took over. "You poor dears look rode hard and put up wet," she said softly, leading them to a guest room. "You get yourselves cleaned up while I see about some supper." Alone in the quiet, clean room, Jane washed the trail dust from her face. "Do you think we are truly safe here?" she whispered. Josephine worked a brush through her tangled hair. "Clayton trusts them, so I do too. He put everything on the line for us." Jane watched her sister in the mirror. "You think highly of him." "I do," Josephine admitted. "He has a certain honor about him." Jane finally managed a small smile. And he is easy on the eyes. Josephine's cheeks flushed. That has nothing to do with anything. Over in Matthew's study, Clayton laid out the whole ugly story. So this Hoffman character wants their inheritance, Matthew concluded, stroking his beard. And you figure he was taking them to Chicago? Clayton's expression was grim. That is my guess. Get them far from home. Force them to sign everything over. You let Sheriff Harper know? Matthew asked. I sent a boy with a message from Deer Creek. We need to keep the ladies hidden until we know who is pulling the strings. They can stay as long as it takes, Matthew said. But what about you, Clayton? This is not your trouble. It became my trouble, Clayton answered, his jaw set. The moment I took them off that train. Matthew gave a slow nod. Well, an extra gun is always welcome. That evening, after a good meal, everyone gathered in the sitting room. The sisters, clean and wearing borrowed clothes, looked like themselves again. I sent a man to town, Matthew told them. He will wire the sheriff and should be back by tomorrow night. We cannot thank you enough, Josephine said, her voice full of gratitude. Sarah just smiled. Nonsense, dear. This old house gets quiet now that our children are grown and gone, Sarah added. Jane, looking more at ease, asked about the ranch. Been here 15 years, Matthew said, his eyes on his wife. Built it after my ranger days were done. Sarah here was brave enough to join me. For the first time in days, Josephine felt the tight knot in her stomach unwind. She found herself watching Clayton, who sat quietly, mostly listening. She noticed things she had not seen before, like the faint scar on his jaw and the way his mouth tilted when something amused him. When Sarah led the sisters to their room, Josephine glanced back. Clayton was watching her, his expression hard to read. Their eyes met for a long moment before he gave a slight nod. Her heart beat a little faster as she walked down the hall. The next morning felt almost normal. Jane found a shelf of books, while a restless Josephine asked Sarah if she could walk outside. Of course, dear, Sarah told her. Just do not wander too far. Josephine stepped out onto the porch, taking in the sights and sounds of the ranch waking up. A horse's snort and a man's low voice drew her toward the corral. There was Clayton, patiently working with a fiery young stallion. He moved with a quiet confidence, murmuring to the animal until it finally calmed and took an apple from his hand. The trust being built between them was a powerful thing to see. He is magnificent, Josephine said, leaning on the fence. Clayton looked over, his focus broken. Matthew is raising some fine horses. You are very good with him, she noted. Since I was a boy, he said, leaving the corral. My father taught me patience works better than force. That seems like a lesson for more than just horses, she said, walking with him to the barn. In the cool quiet, they sat on hay bales. Tell me about your life back home, Clayton asked. It was comfortable, she began. After our mother passed 5 years ago, my father taught me the family business. I can read a ledger and negotiate a contract as well as any man. That explains it, Clayton said. They need you alive to sign things over because you know the business inside and out. Exactly, Josephine agreed. But I cannot imagine who is behind Hoffman. My father had rivals, but not like this. Money makes people do terrible things, Clayton said quietly. And it makes some do the best of things, she countered, looking right at him. You took a great risk for us, one that a reward could never cover. Some things are not about money, he replied, his gaze holding hers. The air in the barn grew thick with things not being said. Suddenly the sound of a horse pounding toward the house shattered the quiet. Clayton was on his feet in a second, his hand on his pistol. They rushed out to see one of Matthew's men riding in hard and fast. By the time they got to the porch, Matthew was already hearing the news. His face was grim. Hoffman's men were seen in Riverton. They are coming this way. Clayton's jaw clenched. How many? 8 of them, the rider answered, still breathing hard. They look like hired guns. Been flashing a lot of cash around. Matthew looked square at his wife. Sarah, get the women ready. Clayton in my office. As Sarah hustled the sisters inside, Clayton followed Matthew, his mind racing. None of the options felt good. "They'll be here by nightfall if they ride hard," Matthew said, spreading a map on his desk. "We could try to run, but with the ladies—" Clayton stared at the map. "We can't fight them. We're outnumbered, and I won't put the sisters in the middle of a gunfight." Matthew nodded. "There is my old hunting cabin," he offered, pointing to a spot deep in the foothills. "It's hidden and stocked, but it is a rough ride through tough country." Clayton looked doubtful. "I am not sure they can make it." "There is another way," Matthew said, rolling up the map with a final snap. "The supply wagon heads to the mining camp at Eagle Peak tomorrow," Matthew explained. "We can hide the girls inside, buried under the cargo. Nobody would ever think to look there." From the camp, they could catch a stagecoach to Fort Collins. Clayton thought it over. It was a long shot, but it just might work. "I will go with them, of course." "Of course," Matthew said with a look that Clayton decided to ignore. Within the hour, things were moving. The supply wagon was pulled into the barn, far from any curious eyes. Matthew's most trusted man, an old hand named Davis, was told the plan. They shifted the usual cargo of beans and tools to make a small, hidden space where the sisters could ride. Josephine and Jane, now in practical clothes from Sarah, listened as Clayton laid it all out. "It's not going to be comfortable," he told them. "The road is rough, and you have to stay hidden." Jane looked nervous, but Josephine gave a firm nod. "We will be fine. What about you?" "I will follow on horseback, keeping out of sight," Clayton said. "If trouble comes, I will be close." Sarah packed them food, water, and blankets, all while keeping up a stream of cheerful talk for Jane. The younger sister was scared, but she held herself together. As the sun began to set, the whole ranch grew tense. Matthew placed his men around the property, ready to delay Hoffman's crew when they showed up. The plan was simple: play dumb and give the wagon a good head start. In the barn, Davis was getting ready to leave at first light. Clayton had the sisters practice climbing into their hiding spot, just in case they had to move fast. For a moment, while Jane was with Sarah, Josephine pulled Clayton aside. "What if they do not believe Matthew? They could hurt him." Clayton's face was serious. "Matthew can take care of himself, and Hoffman is not stupid enough to start a war with a respected rancher over a hunch." "It feels like we bring danger to everyone who helps us," she said, her voice full of worry. Clayton's hand gently covered hers. "This is not your fault, Josephine. Do not ever think that." Their eyes met, and for a second something unspoken passed between them. A connection that was more than just circumstance. He gave her hand a light squeeze before stepping back. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Late that night, Matthew's prediction came true. The sound of dogs barking announced Hoffman's arrival. Through a window, Josephine and Jane watched Matthew meet the men in the yard. He looked calm, but his own men were scattered around, rifles in hand. The sisters were too far away to hear, but they could see it all. Matthew was polite but firm, shaking his head. Hoffman grew angry, waving his arms. After a few long minutes, the tense meeting ended. Hoffman's group pulled back, but they made camp just within sight of the ranch. It was a clear signal that they were not leaving. "They are watching," Clayton told the sisters later. "But they will not attack the ranch. The supply wagon is our best hope." At dawn, the ranch came alive with the usual morning hustle. In all the commotion, Davis hitched his team to the supply wagon like it was any other day. With the barn blocking the view from Hoffman's camp, Clayton helped the sisters into their cramped hiding place. "Stay completely silent," he whispered as he covered them with crates. "No matter what you hear, do not make a sound unless I or Davis give the word." Josephine nodded, squeezing her sister's hand. "Be careful, Clayton." His serious expression softened for just a moment. "I always am." Then he was gone. The sisters lay in the dark as the wagon lurched into motion. Through tiny cracks, they saw the ranch disappear behind them. They rode in silence for more than an hour. The only sounds were the creaking wagon and the steady plod of the horses. Then, without warning, Davis pulled the team to a halt. "Whoa there!" he called out. The sisters froze. They heard men's voices, but it was not Clayton. "Morning, old man," a rough voice said. "Where you headed?" "Eagle Peak Mining Camp," Davis answered, his voice calm. "Same place I go every week. Who wants to know?" "Just passing through," the man said. "Heard there have been some thefts around here. Mind if we check your cargo?" Josephine's heart pounded against her ribs. She felt Jane's hand tighten on hers until it hurt. "Help yourself," Davis said, sounding bored. "Not much to steal but beans and pickaxes." Heavy boots stomped toward the back of the wagon. Through a crack, Josephine saw a bearded man walking around eyeing the cargo. He climbed onto the wagon bed, his boots landing just inches from her face. He poked around for a few minutes, then jumped down. "Looks clean," he grunted. "Say, you have not seen two sisters traveling alone, have you? Real pretty. Might be in trouble." "Have not seen a woman in 3 weeks," Davis chuckled. "That is the mining life for you." The men talked for another minute, then finally rode off. The sisters could barely make out the words, just the low rumble of voices before the sound of horses faded down the trail. Davis waited a good long while before he spoke, his voice low. "Stay put, ladies. That was Hoffman's crew, and you never know if they'll circle back." The wagon started rolling again, but now the air inside felt heavy with worry. Where was Clayton? Did he see those men? Was he still out there, watching over them? By noon, the road got mean, climbing steep and rough into the hills. Every single bump and jolt was a test for the sisters, crammed in their tight, dark space. The summer heat turned that wagon into an oven. Finally, Davis called back to them. "It looks clear for a spell. Y'all can sit up and stretch, but keep your heads down." Josephine and Jane scrambled out from under the canvas, staying low. The fresh air felt like a blessing after hours of breathing in dust and dry goods. "Where is Mr. Zachary?" Jane asked, saying what was on both their minds. Davis kept his eyes locked on the path ahead. "He is shadowing us. Do not you worry none. He likely saw those fellas and is making sure they are gone for good." Just as he said it, Clayton rode out from the trees, keeping pace with them for a moment before nudging his horse, Storm, up to the front. "2 more of Hoffman's men are up the road," he said flatly, his eyes scanning the ridge. Davis's face was grim. "Can we get around them?" "There's an old logging track about a half-mile from here that heads east," Clayton told them. "It is rough going, but it ought to take us past them. We should still make Eagle Peak by nightfall." That new route turned out to be a whole lot harder than the main trail. The narrow path, meant for timber wagons on frozen winter ground, was a mess of ruts and weeds in the summer. The wagon groaned and creaked as Davis wrestled it over the tough ground. Josephine and Jane stayed hidden, but the ride was now much worse. Every bump and jolt sent a shock through their bodies. Late in the afternoon, disaster hit. The wagon hit a deep rut, and with a loud crack, the right wheel shattered. The whole wagon tilted sideways, sending crates sliding everywhere and almost crushing the sisters. Clayton was there in a second, helping Davis calm the horses. The wagon was stopped, but the wheel was broken for good. "Are you two all right?" Clayton asked as he helped them out of the mess. Josephine nodded, brushing dust from her dress. "We are shaken, but we are okay." Jane looked pale, but she was not hurt. "I am fine," she said. "What do we do?" Davis was already looking at the broken wheel. "I cannot fix this here. We are about 6 miles from Eagle Peak, but that is a long way to walk with Hoffman's men around." Clayton looked at the thick forest around them. It offered cover, but it would be hard going. Behind them, the trail was watched. Ahead was safety, but it was 6 miles away. "We will have to split up," he said. "Davis, you unhitch your horse and ride to the camp for help. The sisters and I will go on foot. We will stick to the woods." Davis looked worried. "That leaves you pretty exposed, Clayton." "We will manage," Clayton said with more certainty than he truly felt, "and we can move quieter on foot." Once the plan was set, they moved fast, grabbing water, food, and Clayton's rifle. Davis took the stronger horse and promised he would be back as fast as he could. "Stay on this track," he advised before he left. It follows the creek most of the way into town. If you need to hide, there are some old trapper cabins scattered in these woods." As Davis disappeared down the path, Josephine felt a fresh wave of fear. She looked over at Clayton, who was calmly checking his rifle, and felt a little better. "We need to move," he said, looking at the long shadows. "We have got about 3 hours of daylight left." The walk was slow. Clayton took the lead, moving with the easy silence of a man who knew the wilderness. Jane, for all her grit, was clearly worn out from the last few days. Josephine stayed right by her sister, helping her along, her own body aching with every step. They had gone maybe 2 miles when Clayton suddenly threw up a hand, signaling them to freeze. He tilted his head, listening hard, then waved them off the path into the thick brush. "Someone is coming," he whispered, as they ducked behind a big fallen tree. Multiple riders. A few minutes later, 3 men on horseback came into view, moving slow, their eyes on the ground. Even from a distance, Josephine knew one of them was Hoffman. They must have found the wrecked wagon and were on their trail. Clayton's jaw tightened as he watched them get closer. His hand went to his rifle, but he stopped, not wanting a firefight with the sisters caught in the middle. "There is a creek just past those pines," he whispered, pointing to their right. "If we can get to it without being seen, the water will hide our tracks." They started crawling away from the path, staying as low as they could. Josephine's heart was hammering so hard she was sure the riders would hear it. Jane, bless her heart, was moving like a shadow, her fear making her forget how tired she was. They were almost to the trees when it happened. Jane's foot snagged on a root and she went down with a small cry she could not hold back. That little sound carried in the quiet woods. "There!" one of the men hollered. "In the trees! Run!" Clayton yelled, all stealth forgotten. "For the creek!" They crashed through the brush, branches clawing at their faces. Behind them, men were shouting and horses were thundering closer. The creek was just ahead, a silver line in the dying light. Clayton got there first and turned to help them down the steep bank. "Wade upstream," he ordered, his rifle ready. "I will hold them off." "Clayton, no!" Josephine cried, even as she pulled Jane into the cold, knee-deep water. His eyes met hers, sharp and full of purpose. "Go, I will find you. Head for that big dead pine tree on the ridge." A shot rang out, and wood exploded from a tree right next to Clayton's head. He fired back, making the men dive for cover. With one last worried look at Clayton, Josephine dragged Jane into the current. They fought their way upstream, just like he said, the cold water making their legs go numb, while the sound of gunfire echoed behind them. For what felt like an eternity, the sisters pushed through the water, using the growing darkness as cover. The shooting had stopped, but Josephine had no idea if that was a good sign or a bad one for Clayton. "We need to find that pine tree," she told Jane, helping her up the bank as night fell completely. Worn out and soaked to the bone, they climbed that ridge, the last bit of daylight showing them a huge dead pine against the sky. It was the landmark Clayton had told them about. They collapsed at the base of the giant tree, their bodies shaking from the cold and the long day. Josephine put an arm around her sister, trying to share what little warmth she had. "He will come," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as Jane. "Clayton will find us." Jane just nodded, her teeth chattering. As the moon rose, lighting up the woods, they waited and listened. The forest was full of night sounds. An owl, little critters rustling in the leaves, a distant coyote. Then they heard a different sound, the clear snap of a twig like a signal. Josephine stiffened. Josephine. Jane. It was Clayton's voice, quiet and careful, coming out of the dark. "We are here," Josephine called back softly, relief washing over her like a warm wave. Clayton stepped out of the shadows. In the moonlight, she could see he was limping, but otherwise, he looked to be unharmed. "Thank goodness," he said, his voice low as he knelt beside them. "Are you all hurt?" Josephine looked at his worried face in the faint light. "Just cold and worn out," she said. "What was all that commotion?" "We heard shooting." Clayton laid his rifle down and took off his heavy coat. wrapping it around Jane. "Hoffman and one of his boys kept after you. The other one stayed behind to deal with me." His face hardened. "Well, he won't be causing trouble for anyone ever again." Josephine didn't judge him. She was just thankful he was alive. "What about Hoffman?" she asked. Clayton shook his head. "I lost them down by the creek, but they're still out there. We need to get moving." The sisters, exhausted as they were, got back on their feet. Clayton guided them along the ridge, staying under the cover of the pines. "There's an old trapper's cabin about a mile from here," he explained. "It ought to be empty. We can hole up there for the night." The cabin was not much to look at. It was just a single room with a stone fireplace and some rough wooden bunks. But it had 4 walls and a roof, and that was all that mattered. Clayton took a quick look around. "No food, but we got dry firewood and some old blankets. It's better than sleeping on the ground." He started a small fire while Josephine helped Jane get out of her wet clothes. She wrapped her sister in a dusty but dry blanket. Jane was so tired she fell asleep right away, curled up on a narrow bunk. Josephine changed next, too cold to worry about being modest. Clayton kept his back turned and focused on the fire until she was wrapped in her own blanket. "You ought to get some rest, too," he said softly, not looking at her. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Josephine edged closer to the fire, letting the warmth soak in. "What about you?" "I'll stand watch," he answered, checking his pistol. "Hoffman's not the type to give up." In the flickering firelight, she saw how tired he looked. The man had put his own life on the line for them, and the weight of that settled deep in her heart. "Clayton," she said quietly. He finally met her eyes. "Saying thank you just doesn't feel like enough." A different kind of warmth sparked in his eyes. "It's enough," he said, his voice a little rough. Josephine reached out and her hand found his. His skin was calloused from hard work. After a second, his fingers wrapped around hers. They just sat there together, holding hands and watching the flames. Finally, Josephine was too tired to keep her eyes open and moved to the other bunk. She drifted off to sleep, feeling safe with Clayton sitting guard by the door. Morning came too quickly with gray light peeking through the one small window. Jane was still asleep and Clayton was dozing in a chair by the door, his rifle resting on his lap. When Josephine moved, his eyes snapped open, instantly alert. "Any trouble?" she whispered. Clayton shook his head. "All quiet. But we need to get a move on. Davis should have made it to Eagle Peak by now, so help could be on its way." A thought suddenly struck Josephine. "The stagecoach to Fort Collins, what day does it leave?" "It leaves every day at noon," Clayton said, catching her meaning. "If we get to town by then, you and Jane can be on it." The idea of being safe was a powerful one. Yet Josephine felt a strange pull at the thought of leaving Clayton so soon. Before she could think on it, Jane started to wake up and it was time to get ready. They finished the last of Clayton's supplies, some jerky and hard biscuits, and drank water from a spring. Their clothes were still a bit damp, but dry enough to wear. As they got ready to leave, Clayton told them the plan. "We'll follow this ridge for about 3 miles, then head down to the main trail. With any luck, we'll run into Davis and his men. If not, it's another 3 miles to Eagle Peak." The journey that morning was slow and careful. Clayton kept his eyes peeled for any sign they were being followed. The sisters felt a renewed sense of hope pushing them forward. Around mid-morning, they reached the spot where they needed to head down to the main road. Clayton held up a hand, stopping them. He stood there studying the open ground below. "Something's not right," he muttered. Josephine came up beside him. "What is it?" He pointed down at the road. "It's empty. Eagle Peak is a busy mining camp. There should be wagons and riders all over the place." Just as he said it, the crack of a rifle shot echoed from the direction of town, followed by a few more. "Get down," Clayton ordered, pulling them behind some rocks. "That ain't no hunting party." More shots rang out, and they could hear a faint shout on the wind. Clayton's face grew grim. "I think Hoffman's men made it to town," he said. "They're likely looking for you and not too nicely." Jane's face went pale. "Those poor people. This is our fault." "No," Clayton said, his voice firm. "This is on Hoffman. Y'all are the victims here, not the cause." Josephine stood up taller, her fear turning into resolve. "So what do we do? We can't go into town now." Clayton thought for a moment. None of the choices were good. "There's another town, Silver Creek, about 20 miles west. It's a rough trip overland, but it might be our only shot." 20 miles, Jane whispered, her voice full of doubt. Josephine squeezed her sister's hand. "We can do it, Jane. We've made it this far." Clayton gave Josephine a nod of approval. "We'll need supplies first. I know a homestead in the valley to the west. If we're lucky, the family there will help us out." With a new plan, they started the tricky climb down from the ridge. The shooting from Eagle Peak had stopped, which made Clayton even more nervous. "They either found who they were looking for, or they're spreading out their search," he said. By early afternoon, they reached the valley and made their way toward the homestead. It was a simple place with a small cabin, a barn, and a garden. Smoke curled from the chimney, and everything looked peaceful. "Y'all wait here," Clayton told the sisters, leaving them hidden in the trees as he walked up to the cabin by himself. A middle-aged man with a beard stepped onto the porch holding a shotgun. He and Clayton talked for a bit, and Josephine could see the farmer start to relax. After a few minutes, Clayton waved them over. As they got closer, a woman came out to stand beside her husband, looking at them with worried eyes. "This is Mr. and Mrs. Parker," Clayton said. "They've agreed to give us a hand." The Parkers were more than willing to help once they heard the sisters' story. Mrs. Parker, a kind woman with warm eyes, started making them some food right away. Her husband offered Clayton extra ammunition and gave him directions to Silver Creek. "There's been trouble up at Eagle Peak for a few days now," Mr. Parker told them while they ate a wonderful stew. "Strangers have been poking around, asking questions and throwing their weight around. We try to keep to ourselves, but word gets around." When they finished eating, Mrs. Parker packed them a bag with bread, cheese, and jerky for their journey. She even gave the sisters some of her own clean clothes to wear. One piece. The fit was not perfect. "The trail to Silver Creek is marked clear until you get to Elk Canyon," Mr. Parker explained, drawing a simple map on a scrap of paper. "After that, you will have to follow the creek north. The town is tucked in a little valley. You cannot miss it." Clayton looked at the map, memorizing it. "How long?" 2 days if you take it steady," Parker said. "One day if you push hard, but it is some rough country." Clayton nodded, folding the map and putting it in his pocket. "Thank you. We will get going." Mrs. Parker looked at them with kind, worried eyes. "You could rest here tonight." The young ladies looked plum-tuckered out. Josephine was grateful for the offer, but she shook her head. "It is not safe for y'all if we stay. If Hoffman's men are looking everywhere—" "She is right," Clayton agreed. "The less you have to do with us, the better." As they got ready to leave, Mr. Parker did something that surprised them all. He led a horse out of the barn, a solid brown mare with a calm look in her eye. "Take Penny," he said, handing the reins to Clayton. "The ladies can ride together. You can bring her back when this is over, or just send word." Josephine started to protest the kindness, but the farmer just waved it off. "Folks help each other out here. Maybe you will do the same for someone else one day." With genuine thanks, they promised to return the horse and set off for Silver Creek. Clayton led the horse while Jane and Josephine rode together. The sun sank lower as they traveled, the wide valley turning into rugged, tree-covered hills. Clayton pushed them at a good pace, trying to make ground before dark. By dusk, they hit Elk Canyon, a deep cut in the earth with steep, rocky walls. The trail got narrow, winding along the creek deep into the canyon. "We will make camp up ahead," Clayton said as they crossed a rough patch of trail. "There is a clear spot with good cover." The campsite was a small clearing under some tall pines where the creek pooled up. Clayton helped the sisters down, both of them stiff from the long ride. While he tended to the horse, Josephine and Jane got the firewood and laid out their bedrolls. The simple chores felt normal after all the chaos. Josephine watched Clayton move around the camp, capable and sure in everything he did. "He is quite a man, is he not?" Jane whispered, noticing her sister's stare. Josephine felt her face get warm. "He has saved our lives more than once. Of course I admire him." Jane just smiled. "It is more than that, Josie. I see the way you two look at each other." Before Josephine could answer, Clayton came back, and they started talking about the journey. As night fell, they huddled near the fire, speaking softly about their plans. They would find the law in Silver Creek, send a telegram, and get to a bigger, safer town. "What will you do after we are safe, Clayton?" Jane asked. Clayton poked the fire with a stick. "That depends. My job is not done until the folks behind this are dealt with." He looked up, and his eyes met Josephine's across the fire. In that quiet look, something important passed between them, a promise of something more than just survival. A distant crack of a branch broke the silence, and Clayton was on his feet in an instant, rifle ready. He scanned the darkness outside their little circle of firelight. "Stay put," he whispered. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows like a ghost. The minutes felt like hours while the sisters waited, listening for any sound. He finally reappeared, just as quietly. "Just a deer," he said, but he still looked on edge. "We will take watches tonight. I will go first, then I will wake you, Josephine." Josephine lay wrapped in her blanket, but sleep would not come. Jane was already fast asleep beside her, but Josephine's mind was racing. Across the fire, Clayton sat with his back to a tree, his rifle resting on his knees, his eyes sweeping the darkness. In the flickering light, his face was a mask of shadows. She must have drifted off, because the next thing she knew, Clayton was gently shaking her shoulder. "Your watch, Josephine." She sat up, feeling groggy. He handed her his pistol. "Just in case," he said softly. "Wake me if you hear anything." While he slept, Josephine sat by the fire. The night was quiet, with just the sound of the creek and an owl. She kept looking over at Clayton. With his face relaxed in sleep, he looked younger, more vulnerable. What was his life like before all this? As the sky began to lighten, Josephine woke Clayton. They broke camp in a hurry, ready to get to Silver Creek. The second day was tougher. The trail through the canyon was hard to follow, sometimes blocked by rock slides. Clayton had to scout ahead often, leaving them with the horse. By noon, they had to leave the main trail and follow the creek north. The path got steeper, and they had to get off and lead the horse. "We are making good time," Clayton said during a short rest. "If we keep this pace, we could reach Silver Creek tonight." Jane nodded, tired but determined. "The sooner we get there, the better." They were just about to start again when Clayton froze, grabbing his rifle. "Get down!" he yelled. At that moment, gunfire exploded from the rocks above them. A bullet hit the tree right next to Josephine. The horse panicked, broke loose, and ran off down the trail. "Behind those rocks!" Clayton shouted, firing back to give them cover as they scrambled for safety. Josephine could see two men on the ridge above them. It was Hoffman and one of his thugs. They had been ambushed. "They have the high ground," Clayton said between shots. "We have to move before they get around us." "The horse!" Jane cried out. "All our supplies!" "No time for that," Clayton answered. "Stay low and follow me." They started a desperate run down the canyon, using every rock and tree for cover. Clayton was a natural in a fight, always keeping himself between the sisters and the gunfire. For what felt like an hour, they ran and hid, with Hoffman and his man chasing them, herding them like cattle. "They are pushing us away from town," Clayton realized, "trying to get us into open country." "Is there another way?" Josephine asked, her mind racing. Clayton shook his head. "Not without them seeing us." Jane looked pale but calm. "So what do we do?" Clayton checked his rifle. "I am down to my last 6 bullets. Not enough to win a fight." He was quiet for a second, thinking hard. "There is only one thing to do. I will lead them away. You two make for Silver Creek. Stay in the creek bed so you do not leave tracks." "No," Josephine said immediately. "We are not leaving you." Clayton's eyes were fierce. "It is the only way, Josephine. I can lose them in these mountains, then meet you in town." "It is too dangerous," she pleaded. "They will have to catch me first," he said with a faint smile. "I know this country better than they do." Jane gently touched her sister's arm. "Josie, he is right. This is our only real chance." The truth of it was plain as day, but Josephine's heart fought against it. She couldn't stand the thought of Clayton facing that monster Hoffman all by himself. If he died because of them, because of her, it would be too much to bear. "I cannot let you do this," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Clayton's hard expression softened just a bit. He reached out and let his fingers brush her cheek for a moment. "I will find you in Silver Creek. That is a promise." The air between them was thick with feelings that neither one of them had spoken aloud. Clayton then turned to Jane. "2 miles down this creek it forks. You take the path to the right. That will take you straight to town. Stay in the water as much as you can." Jane nodded, locking the directions in her mind. "We will find the sheriff the second we get there." "Good," Clayton said. He gave his rifle one last check and looked right into Josephine's eyes again. "Go on now. I'm fixin' to make some noise and lead them away from y'all." Josephine knew there was no more time for arguing. With a heart that felt like a stone, she touched Clayton's arm. "Please, be careful." His hand briefly covered hers. "Always am. Now get." The sisters slipped into the shadows, keeping low as they hurried down the rocky creek bed. Behind them they heard Clayton start firing his rifle much faster than before. Then they heard him crashing through the brush, moving away from them, and drawing their pursuers with him. Hoffman's furious yell bounced off the canyon walls, followed by more gunshots. He and his man had taken the bait, chasing after Clayton instead of the sisters. Josephine had to fight the powerful urge to look back. Jane pulled her along, knowing what her sister was feeling but keeping her mind on getting them out alive. "He knows what he's doing," Jane said to comfort her as they pushed through the cold water. "We have to trust him." "Trust him?" Yes, Josephine realized with sudden clarity. She trusted Clayton Zachary with her life, her sister's life, and maybe even her heart. That single thought gave her new strength as they pushed on toward Silver Creek. Every step took them closer to safety, but farther from the man who had come to mean so much, so fast. The afternoon crawled by as they followed the winding creek. Just as Clayton had said, they came to a fork and took the right branch into a tighter valley. Soon they started seeing signs of people. An old wooden box left by the water, a rough trail alongside the creek, and stumps where trees had been cut down. As evening set in, they finally saw it. Silver Creek was a cluster of wooden buildings tucked into the valley. Smoke curled up from chimneys, and the faint sounds of life drifted through the air. The sisters walked into town cautiously. They knew they looked a fright and needed to find a friend before they told their whole story. They walked down the main street, getting more than a few stares from the miners and other folks. "The sheriff's office," Josephine said quietly, pointing to a building with bars on its windows. "That is where we need to be." Sheriff Wilson of Silver Creek was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s. He listened to their shortened tale with a look of growing concern. "Hoffman," he said, writing the name down in a big book. "And you are saying this fella claims to be your guardian, but he has no legal paper to prove it?" "None at all," Josephine stated firmly. "Our father's will named a Mr. Edward Hargrove from Oregon City as the man in charge of the estate. He is our legal advisor until I turn 25, or get married." The sheriff nodded, thinking. "I will send a telegraph to Oregon City right away. Sheriff Harper up there is a good man. We have worked together before." He looked at the two exhausted sisters with kind eyes. "For now, my wife, Mrs. Wilson, will get you all settled at the hotel. You will be safe here." Just as he promised, the sheriff's wife, a capable and motherly woman, walked them to the town hotel. She arranged for a room, hot baths, and some clean clothes borrowed from her own daughters. "That friend of yours, the cowboy who helped you," Mrs. Wilson asked gently as she got them settled. Do you reckon he will make it to town? Josephine's heart ached at the question. He promised he would. The older woman patted her hand. Then I'm sure he will, dear. The good men who make it out here are the ones who keep their promises. That night, the sisters shared a bed, clean and fed for the first time in what felt like forever. Jane was asleep in an instant. But Josephine lay awake, listening to the new sounds of the town and wondering where Clayton was. She prayed he was safe and not hurt. Please be alive, she whispered into the dark. Please, find your way here. The next morning, news came over the telegraph wire. Sheriff Wilson came to their hotel room right after they finished breakfast. His face was serious, but he looked satisfied. Heard back from Harper, he said, getting right to the point. Seems you ladies stirred up a real hornet's nest. Harper's been looking into things since you went missing. He took a breath. The man calling himself Hoffman is really James Kruger. He is wanted in 3 states for swindling folks and is suspected in 2 killings. Josephine let out a small gasp. Who was he working for? Now that is the interesting part, Wilson went on. Your father's old business partner, a man named Victor Chambers. It looks like he's been trying to get his hands on your family's business since your father passed. When he could not do it legally, he cooked up this scheme to have you 2 declared missing so he could take control. Jane's eyes grew wide. Mr. Chambers? But he was father's friend for 20 years. When a pile of money is on the table, friendship has a funny way of getting left behind, Wilson said grimly. Harper has already arrested Chambers. He is locked up tight in Oregon City. Josephine took in the news with a tangle of emotions. She was relieved the danger was ending, but furious at the betrayal. It was a terrible injustice, leaving without knowing if the man who saved them was dead or alive. But that was the choice facing Josephine Reeves. A knot of worry was tied so tight in her stomach she could hardly breathe. Any word about Clayton Zachary? She asked the sheriff, her voice strained. He just shook his head. Nothing. A stagecoach was headed for Junction City at noon. From there, the train would take them home to Oregon City. It was her duty to get her sister Jane home safely, her duty to take over their father's business. But her heart wanted to stay. This story is about promises kept and the courage to trust your heart. Do not turn away, because you need to see if a good man's promise is worth the wait. We will be ready, she finally told the sheriff, making the only choice she could. As they packed, her perceptive sister Jane watched her. He will find us, Jane said quietly. If not here, then in Oregon City. Josephine prayed she was right. She just wished she knew he was safe. The hours leading up to noon crawled by. Sheriff Wilson had a deputy take them to the stage, while his wife gave them a basket of food for the trip. Once their story got around, folks in town came by to wish them well. As the driver readied the horses, Josephine stood on the hotel porch, her eyes searching the street one last time. She was hoping against all hope for just a glimpse of him. Jane stood right there with her, offering silent support. Time to board, the driver called out. With a heavy heart, Josephine turned to leave, and then she froze. A rider was coming down the far end of the street. Even from that distance, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Clayton, she cried out. She gathered her skirts and rushed down the steps, not caring who was watching. He swung off his horse just as she reached him, his face breaking into a wide smile of relief. You are alive, she breathed, stopping just short of throwing herself into his arms. I keep my promises, he answered, his voice rough from exhaustion, but his eyes were warm. Hoffman Kruger will not be troubling you again. Realization dawned on her. You, Clayton gave one firm nod. It was either him or me. I chose me. There was no regret in his voice, only the calm certainty of a man who did what had to be done. The stage is leaving, Jane called from the porch, her own smile obvious. Josephine turned back to Clayton, faced with the goodbye she had been dreading. We are returning to Oregon City, Sheriff Harper is sending someone to meet us. Clayton nodded, keeping his expression neutral. That is good. You will be safe there now that Chambers is locked up. Josephine took a deep breath. Will you come to Oregon City? For a second, something flashed in his eyes, a mix of hope and uncertainty. Do you want me to? She asked. Yes, she answered without a moment's hesitation. Very much. The stage driver yelled a final warning. Clayton took her hand and pressed his pocket watch into it. Keep this for me, he said quietly. I will come for it soon. Josephine understood it was a pledge, a promise to return. She closed her fingers around the watch and nodded. I will be waiting. Their eyes met for one last moment before Jane called again. Go, Clayton said gently. I will find you. That promise was enough to get her through the long journey back to Oregon City. Just as planned, a deputy met them in Junction City for the train ride home. Seeing the familiar landscape was a comfort after everything they had been through. Sheriff Harper himself was at the station to greet them. Welcome home, he said warmly. You have been sorely missed. The next few days were a whirlwind of giving statements and handling business affairs. Victor Chambers was facing a long list of serious charges, and his confession brought down others involved in the kidnapping plot. Through it all, Josephine did her duties, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Clayton and the watch she now kept in her pocket. It was a constant reminder of his promise. Jane saw how distracted her sister was and finally spoke up one evening. You are in love with him, are not you? Josephine did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes, she admitted. I think I have been since he first stopped that train. Then why the sad face? Jane asked. He will come, Josie. A man does not risk what he risked for you, only to disappear. But what if he changed his mind? Josephine whispered her deepest fear. What if a woman with my responsibilities is not what he wants? Then he would not be the man you fell in love with, Jane pointed out. And I do not believe that is the case. About 2 weeks after they got back, Josephine was in her father's study when the housekeeper announced a visitor. Mr. Zachary is here to see you, Miss Reeves. Josephine's heart leapt into her throat. She stood so fast she nearly knocked over her inkwell. Taking a second to compose herself, she smoothed her skirt. Show him in, please. When Clayton walked in, she almost gasped. The trail-worn cowboy was gone. In his place stood a gentleman wearing a well-tailored suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. Only his intense blue eyes were the same. Clayton, she greeted him, feeling suddenly shy. He smiled, looking a little self-conscious. I thought it was best to make a proper impression. The whole town was already buzzing about the cowboy who rescued the Reeves sisters. Josephine offered him a small smile, feeling herself relax just a little. Let them talk, she thought. She told him, I owe you my life, and my sister Jane's too. Clayton took a step into her study, his eyes scanning the fancy room. For a second, she worried the wealth all around them might feel like a wall between their worlds. I think this belongs to you, she said, pulling his pocket watch from her skirt. I kept it safe, just like I promised. Clayton didn't reach for it. He just moved closer, his gaze locked on hers. I didn't come back for the watch, Josephine. Her heart skipped. Then why did you come back? He said it plain and simple. For you, if you will have me. Tears welled in her eyes at how direct he was. But what about your life, your plans for Wyoming? All that trouble you left behind? That is all settled now, he told her. Sheriff Harper helped me clear my name. The truth about what happened back at the ranch finally came out. I am a free man, with no shadows chasing me. Hope bloomed in her chest. And what does a free man want with a woman who runs a lumber mill? Clayton smiled and took her hands, the watch now resting between their palms. He wants to build a life with her, to be her partner in everything, even if that means planting his boots right here in Oregon City. Josephine had to be sure. You would really give up the freedom of a cowboy for that? He nodded. I might have to insist on keeping a few horses, though. A man has to hold on to a piece of who he was. Josephine's laugh was full of pure joy. I think we can arrange that. Clayton's face turned serious again. I love you, Josephine Reeves. I think I have since the moment I saw you step off that train, scared but brave, only thinking about your sister. I love you too, she whispered, letting the words out for the first time. He pulled her in, his hand gently touching her cheek. Time just hits different when you're in danger. We lived a whole life in just those few days. When his lips met hers, she knew he was right. Their connection was forged in fire and had come out stronger than any ordinary courtship. When they broke apart, she looked up at him. Jane is going to be thrilled. She was on my side from the very start. And what will the high society folks in this town say? Clayton asked with a grin. They will just have to get used to it, she said with a newfound confidence. Besides, you are a hero now. A month later, as autumn colored the hills, Clayton Zachary and Josephine Reeves were married. The ceremony was a perfect mix of her elegant world and his simple, honest nature. Jane cried happy tears, and Sheriff Harper stood beside Clayton as his best man, looking proud. Friends who had helped them along the way traveled to be there, sharing in their happy ending. Even Davis, the wagon driver, was there as a special guest. As they exchanged their vows, the pocket watch sat on a velvet cushion. It was a reminder of the promise that brought him back to her. After the minister announced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed his bride to the sound of thunderous applause. The party afterward was a celebration of new beginnings. Josephine, holding Clayton's arm, introduced him to her business partners. Her happiness was so real that no one could doubt it. "Are you ready to be a businessman, Mr. Zachary?" one of her partners teased. Clayton pulled her closer. "Sir, I am ready to be whatever she needs me to be." Later, Clayton led Josephine out into the quiet garden. "Are you happy, Mrs. Zachary?" he asked, pulling her into an embrace. "Completely," she said, lifting her face for his kiss. "But I do have one request." "Anything," he promised. Josephine got a mischievous look in her eye. "Teach me how to really ride a horse. If I am going to be a cowboy's wife, I ought to be able to handle myself in rough country." Clayton let out a rich, genuine laugh. "That, my love, I can certainly arrange, though I hope our future trips are a lot less dangerous than our first one." "With you by my side," she said softly, "I am ready for any adventure that comes our way." 5 years later, on a morning much like their wedding day, Clayton watched their little boy Thomas try to climb on his very first pony. "Easy there, son," Clayton called out. "Remember what I showed you." Beside him, Josephine held their baby daughter Emily and watched with pride. "He has your natural way with horses," she said, "and your grit." "And your stubborn streak," Clayton added with a warm smile. The years had been good to them. Clayton had learned the lumber business and even started a successful side business breeding horses, something that was all his own. Josephine had continued to grow the family businesses, earning respect all over the region. Together, they were a strong team. Jane had also found her own happiness, marrying a young lawyer and living right down the street. The sisters were still as close as could be. When Thomas finally got himself onto the pony's back, a huge grin spread across his face. Clayton felt a familiar wave of thankfulness wash over him. He was thankful for the telegram that started it all, and for the love that grew out of all that danger. "What are you thinking about?" Josephine asked him. He hugged her a little tighter. "Just about how different things could have been." "I believe we would have found each other no matter what," Josephine said with a quiet confidence. "Some things are just meant to be." Clayton thought about her words. Maybe she was right. But looking at his family, his smart, brave wife and his adventurous children, he was deeply grateful for the exact road that led him to this perfect moment. His life had changed completely, from a lonely cowboy with a past to a husband, a father, and a man people looked up to. "I love you," he said simply, kissing her temple. She leaned against him. "And I love you always." As their son called for them to watch him ride, they walked forward together, a team. It was just one more beautiful moment in the life they had built from the ashes of danger, a future they would keep creating with love, respect, and a partnership that could never be broken. The path they traveled together would sometimes be rough, but it was always headed toward a horizon filled with promise. In that moment, looking at the man who had kept his promise, she knew their life together was just beginning, built on something enduring and true. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.